In the distant future, vampires rule the night, but their numbers are dwindling. One podcast is unlike all the others. Half human, half vampire. This is Lefty Speaks, the official podcast for Vampire Hunter D.
Let's see here. Where were we in the movie? Okay, so after the desert crossing, just abruptly bringing us back, we get to the noble safe house. And a little bit of exposition, of the world of vampires and how they protected themselves from daylight and people coming after them at their vulnerable times. Which, if you want something that screams sci-fi, a giant semi-invisible mirror-coated building that has a bunch of laser weaponry popping out of it, yeah, that'll fit the bill.
That was a cool sequence, especially from an expositionary point of view. It also shows what Left Hand's powers and abilities are, and why he's so incredibly important to Dee's continued survival. Again, if you didn't see the first film where he's eating the grass and all that other stuff, even though I was not particularly fond of the voice performance choices by the voice actor of Left Hand in this in English, they did a great job in the script of constantly reinforcing how important Left Hand was and is. And that was something that was very subtle because he was looking for the door. He kept saying, no door, no door. And then next thing you know, Layla pops out in her wheelie and the scene changes. But it's a really cool scene also that he's walking and timing the lasers in their positions, showing a whole other level of Dee's strategic thinking, and that he knows how other vampires think and how they choose to keep people away from them in defensive systems. So again, very smart, very subtle, a lot of little expositionary things that are not overwhelming, but if you're really paying attention, you're going to pick up some of this stuff.
Yep. The greatest tech possible and defeated by a handful of pebbles.
Yep. Absolutely.
I find the balance of showing the two different approaches and just how far apart they are from Layla, who just charges in, riding the bike with a rocket launcher, and Dee casually strolling up,
click, click,
flicking,
click.
just to click, 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 click rocks. And one person is, using I guess you call it modernish tech, and just, going in guns blazing, and the other guy's throwing pebbles, and the pebble guy wins.
Yeah, right.
I thought that difference, that dichotomy was really interesting for showing the film, the characters, and I also think showing for Layla her trauma coming through, influencing her actions that you hear about throughout the movie, and I think this is just an example of that expressing itself. Is that she's acting out on her anger and her fear. And when you act out on your anger and your fear, you generally don't often make the situation better.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that out of it, she doesn't accomplish much other than, the carriage leaves.
Right.
She gets wounded, dropped to the ground, and Dee, of course, takes off in pursuit of the carriage and does manage to catch up and intercept Meyer, where we learn that, oh wait, Charlotte wasn't exactly kidnapped and taken away against her will, which adds a whole new wrinkle to the story.
Yeah. And obviously also a big departure from the book, because she wasn't even alive. I mean, I don't believe, if I remember correctly, in the book, I don't believe he ever exchanges. He finds her dead. So, that's
Yeah, Charlotte's character in the movie is very different from what's...
Yeah. So, that also, that humanizes Mayor Link a lot, and also I think the Layla's character is also expanded quite heavily in the film, which I really appreciate. So,
And can we talk a little bit about the design of the carriage? I mean, that was absolutely beautiful.
yeah.
I mean, whatever gripes I've had over the years with Bloodlust, the visual design and technical design, I mean, it's up there with like Yoshiaki Kawajiri. Anyway, no, not who's the guy that did Macross Plus designs? It's not Yoshiaki Kawajiri. What's his name? Anyway, the guy who did like the conceptual designs for Macross Plus. Again, another thing that was still kind of red hot at the time. You know, in terms, I'm a tech head. I love mecha and things like that, and I just feel like the melding of Gothic design with almost fantasy-like future technology is just incredible, and that carriage is a great example of that.
Yeah, and even the tunnel that they're in.
Yeah.
Also, the design was really, really cool because it is some fusion between sci-fi and Gothic, but beautifully done.
I think it's Shoji Kawamori. That's what I'm thinking about, the technical designer of Macross. And also the fight scene on top of the carriage is a really cool sequence because you get to see that Meyer Link, for a second or two, can stand toe-to-toe with D, which is also very important because a lot of times that happens in the anime and the books, but it's just really cool to establish the threat level early, which they did very well.
Yep.
Yeah. It's also, and they reveal that perhaps D almost got him. And so obviously is a little bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, you see the little cut, yeah.
Yep. It's like, he's pretty good. He is every bit as good as people have heard.
Yep. And then we go on from the fight. D comes across and finds the wounded Layla, and doesn't leave her to die. Makes the choice to save her life. Even though, as Lefty later chastises him for, why are you helping the competition?
Yeah.
And I think it's
not drinking the blood too,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting comment to, if you look throughout the stories of Dee's character, that, despite how much he gets hit with hatred and fear because he's, half vampire, that he still chooses to help people, and he doesn't demand payment, he doesn't ask for anything in return. She's even hostile to him, like, what did you do to me? And are you trying to take off my clothes and assault me? What have you done? He's like, stop the bleeding and bandage you, take care of yourself. And that's it for him. He's just like, I wasn't doing it to get thanked, I was doing it because thought it was the right thing to do. I just didn't leave her to, bleed out.
But mainly after she said mother, when she cried out for her mom in her blood-stained delirium, that's what actually, in the film, that's what makes him stop.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the whole mother thing. That's kind of his overarching emotional journey. So, when she cries out for mother, he stops, turns around, helps her, and later uses those context clues to basically be like, oh, well, this is why you hate vampires, because something happened with your family, right? Because he's probably dealt with that scenario God knows how many times over the thousands of years that have passed.
And just, again, layers to the movie of, how does this all play together? And I think that adds to me one of the things that I find interesting about kind of the more Japanese storytelling versus Western storytelling is that for us, the characters really need to change a lot for it to feel complete. We rarely have characters that are already complete, so they're changing the world around them. And D is the force of nature that changes the world and people around him. And that, as Neal, you mentioned earlier, Layla's very different in how much screen time she's got, if you will, book versus the movie. And I really do like her arc of going from this burnt, hurt, angry person who believes they're going to die alone, and they're, became a vampire hunter to try and just, take everything they can with them when they go to the grave to what we get at the end of the movie. And I think that was something that was really important for this movie to work.
Well, you could always think of Dee like the shark in Jaws. You know, that shark doesn't really change. But the people you care about are three guys on the boat at the end. And eventually one guy at the boat, you know. But, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, Dee does not change. And if he does, it's almost imperceptible, you know. And it might be something very small, maybe, you know, a thought, a consideration. But, yeah, he doesn't change. But I just thought it was very important that the word mother was the thing that caused him to really stop and pay attention to Layla.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely Dee's character arc isn't very dramatic in any individual novel. The arc for Dee you have to see more subtly over the course of 20 novels.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
and so you don't really see much in the movie itself, but you're seeing Dee's impact on all the other people and characters around him, and how they are changing and adapting, and you know, and in many cases the kind of the heroic arcs of the characters, they're stepping up because of Dee. They're evolving, they're growing because of their interaction with Dee. So it's kind of a vicarious character arc through the others in the novel.
And one of the things I find interesting about that topic of, you know, Layla's fear of being alone, and that after he saves Layla and we switch back to Meyer and you see, you know, his wound kind of starting to repair and heal itself, he's lamenting the fact that, you know, he may care about Charlotte. He loves Charlotte. She loves him. But the fate of the nobles is to be into the night alone. Mm-hmm. You know, their time's fading. They're just, you know, we're just gonna be dust.
The age of
and I find that
is over.
Yeah, I find that you know, whether it's, you know, from I'll call it three main characters here, Meyer, Layla, and Dee, the topic of alone and that melancholy and lament of that is shared by both Meyer and Layla, even though, you know, they are, you know, worlds apart, quite truly, in species, outlook on life. But at the end of the day, both of them have that same fear, that same weight sitting on them. And that's something I really liked about the development of the characters in this story. When you see that, is, yeah, who wants to die alone?
Some things are universal.
I think that's one of the things I really like about the VHD story, is exploring that beyond the fear, beyond the anger, the hatred, all of that, that there's some core things that drive us all. They don't always drive us to good things.
Yeah.
It seems that love and unrequited love is such a recurring theme throughout all the books, whether it be, you know, citizens versus citizens, or nobles versus citizens, or citizens versus nobles. Somebody loves somebody or is lusting after somebody, no pun intended. And people do really rash and harsh things to achieve that love or recognition or respect. And it's whether it's like some sheriff in some rundown town who wants people to respect him, or a corrupt politician who's willing to like make deals with, you know, demons. It keeps popping up. People wanting, it's like, you know, like in what Silence of the Lambs, to covet, to want, is a sin in the Bible, according, you know, to Christian theology. To covet is a sin, but coveting is really the core in a lot of ways of the vampire hunter Dee mythos. People want, even Dee in some level wants something. You know, Left Hand wants something. Everybody they come across, it's always some kind of barter, you know, of some kind, you know, whether you're trading your soul, whether you're trading your heart, or you're trading money. Like something's given or taken in that universe. And it's something I think about a lot. I mean, that even leads me to another question, which, kind of based on the Highlander mythos, does D get stronger every time he kills another vampire? Like, is there like a universal well of vampiric energy that he is sustained by or benefits from whenever he wipes out another noble? I've often thought this and wondered, like, how does he always win? I mean, obviously it's written that way, but in universe, is he actually becoming stronger every time he kills a noble?
Good question. I don't know. I don't think that's ever been addressed. Fan theories.
Yeah. Well, in many vampire games, that is how it happens, right? If you consume the blood of a more powerful or older vampire. Really? Yeah. So in Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game, that is which are heavily inspired by Anne Rice's novels, which also includes that aspect. If a younger vampire drinks the blood of an ancient vampire, they may not become equal as that elder vampire, but they definitely jump in generations. So, which is why Lestat was such a powerful vampire, even though he wasn't really as old as many of the other vampires were. So, gotcha. I mean, it's really an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, like, is it just age that, that makes vampires old? Is it purity with the closeness to the, to Dracula, kind of the father of all vampires? Because if that's the case, D is the son of Dracula. So if that's the case, inherently he is more powerful than the vast majority of vampires, because he is one generation. He is the son of Dracula. So, but again, those are things that I think Kikuchi has wisely not really explained, so that we can ponder this stuff and gives him a little bit of freedom. I mean, it's the same thing like with Lefty. We don't really know everything he can do. So if D gets into some problem that you just can't get out of, well, Lefty happens to have an ability to get out of that one.
Yeah. Like in this movie, Lefty eats spells and souls.
Was there a scene in one of the books where where D could see like people's veins through their skin? Because I remember, maybe I'm imagining it, but I do remember reading something about how somebody had an infection and he could like he stared at them, and then like it would be like an infrared type of thing where he could see their central, well, not the nerve, but the blood, the arteries and stuff.
I think you're right,
but I'm not.
I can't remember which. I think you're right. Now I'm going to have to look that up.
The only reason I think about it is because the powers, there seems to be this like compendium of powers that constantly get, revealed as we go forward.
Yep.
Which is very convenient
he's like
and
10,000
smart.
years old, so I mean, he
gotta have extra tricks in the bag.
Absolutely, that's my,
Yeah. So after we get the revealing that everyone fears dying alone and not being remembered, we get into, right back to the violence. We go from the introspective moment to the Marcuses catching up with what they think is the carriage, and we start to see some of the Barbaroi and their abilities, what makes them special. Because when this is the first time we really meet them. Who is guarding the carriage? Because up until now, it's just been Meyer. And now they go after the carriage and just the arrows literally stick in it like tar, and it just kind of falls apart and like, wait, okay? And I thought it was a very obvious trap that they went for anyways, because they knew they had to go for it. But they got caught incredibly off guard, and one of them, dies as a result of this fight. And I think showing how competent they were handling all of those lesser vampires earlier, the way they kept their cool, the way they fought, their knowledge of what they were dealing with, for this group that's been shown to be very competent to get caught completely off guard and one of their members get assassinated, I think did a great job of showing, oh, wait a minute, they're up against some serious competition here. And after Nolt dies, they don't give up though. Mm-hmm. They're upset. You can tell they care about him. That they are the anguish they feel of losing Nolt, I think came through really well, because even if you are in a violent and dangerous profession, you know that death could be there any time. But if you've survived for years and taken all of these threats, that would be really jarring. Of one instant they're alive, they're standing there, and you're like, hey, snap out of it. There's no snapping out of that.
Yeah.
I thought that was I like the transition between that introspective, melancholy bit back to the gothic creature horror fight, that the humans are definitely not the top of the food chain here. Which leads us into the introduction of the Barbaroi as a whole. Because, I mean, as a collective whole, I mean, they're quite the visual collection.
Yeah, very much so.
And the third book is named Demon Death Chase. And I thought, Neal, what you had mentioned in some of our previous conversations about what's different in this setting, I thought fit very well of the difference between what they chose to go with in the movie versus what the title of the book points towards.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because in the novel, the Barbaroi are not destroyed, right? But in the movie, their fate looks like it's sealed, and maybe only the leader, Grandpa, I forgot his name, but
the guy on the bike.
Yeah,
the unicycle.
It seems like he's the only one that may have survived outside of the few that went with Mayor Link. I mean, their fate is really questionable. That entire society seems to have been destroyed by this encounter in the movie, but in the book, I think that they survive.
And we got a good look at Grove's power. And one of the things Neal, if you want to touch on this a bit, because I think it's in your head a little better than mine, the difference of how they were changed and portrayed, that they're not demons in the movie.
Yeah. I think that's incredibly important, because that's another layer of complexity that I think there's already enough in the movie so far for an audience to deal with, right? And then to say, okay, well, these are demons that, are a lineage of demons for 5,000 years. They've been loyal to Dracula because he saved them. He had pity on them and took them in, and they now serve him. That is just such an additional layer that, and we have more layers in the last act of the movie, right? That there's a lot of twists that we have in the future. So I don't think we need that in the film. Also, we've already added all these other elements, and suddenly we will be adding demons, and I think wisely the producers and the writers of this film realize that to many Western audiences, demons have a very specific thing with Christianity.
Christian connotation,
right? And demons in Japanese folklore a little bit less rigid.
Yeah, the Oni verse.
And so the idea of this whole city to a Western audience, once you hear the word demon, it's like they need to be expelled and exorcised, and they're automatically evil, and so they're less sympathetic, and
right.
Obviously we don't spend a whole lot of time with them in the movie, Grail kind of takes care of him pretty quick, but there is some level of appreciation that this whole town, they're not just all vicious, evil creatures that want destruction. That they're just another
Mutants.
Yeah, exactly.
It was they didn't even need to say it. You see them and the differences among them. You're like, oh, this is something you could see out of an X-Men comic or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And that's why you need a TV series. You could do an entire episode just on their background and not lose any. It wouldn't even be a filler. It would just be really good, exposition and world building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, which is that kind of brings me back to something you mentioned earlier, that you felt that some of the characters in the film, it's like, while the character design is really cool and the action is really cool, you don't really we didn't learn much about Nolt, right? And but that is when you watch a lot of like Japanese animation, like anime, that is a pretty common thing where one episode of a series introduces a really cool character with a really awesome design, and that episode, the whole thing is fighting that one guy, but you don't have the leisure of doing that. That's so much fluff, right? So, whether you're watching Naruto or Dragon Ball, that, and some of those characters stick and some of those characters end up dying off or disappearing, but you'll have 30 different bad guys introduced in a season, and like Ninja Scroll and to a certain degree this film does that as well. Introduces a large number of really amazing character designs, but doesn't have the time or the leisure to really lay into them. And I agree with you. I would be really excited to see a film, a series, a TV series, especially now that streaming is making that a lot more possible.
It would be great. I mean, it would be great just to spend more time in the milieu and the mise en scène, as they say.
Yeah, and my God, the world of Vampire Hunter D has that in spades. So
in both directions, you can go backwards and forwards.
Yep.
42 different novelized stories with I think 51 books last I counted. But yeah, it's a little crazy. Is there anything else that we would want to talk about with the Barbaroi then? Their loyalty, the way the Marcus brothers crash into the fight. One of the things that I found interesting was you see Grove, absolutely demolish them.
Yeah.
And
there's Doctor Strange moment.
Well, there's godlike power.
He is destroying this town. And you think, okay, he's going to get to the carriage and it's just going to get annihilated. And Bengi's just on the back of the carriage goes, what? And just takes the whole thing. Grove goes at D and D's just like, I mean, Sword cuts what clearly seems to be a ephemeral spirit astral projection thing, as you saw, them getting the injection going. And he's physically laying in their truck still.
Yeah.
And I think it just adds another layer to show that the three people from the Barbaroi defending the carriage are absolutely no joke.
Yeah.
Bengi is not just some assassin in the shadows. He's quite powerful. If he can, and take an attack that leveled buildings and killed all manner of these other creatures, and he just, like nothing, just keeps going.
Yeah, well, I
think it just sets up how powerful.
He does fight it off. You can feel it, and maybe partly because his ability is the shadow. He was able to pull in the rays into his spell and not take it himself, but rather redirect it into the darkness. Which is kind of a D&D joke. I shoot the darkness.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, just to show another way to set up okay, the Marcus brothers, they have some aces up their sleeve. They can absolutely rock and roll. And the Barbaroi have a couple aces too. And it just sets up, I think, the expectations of what will happen for the rest of the movie, because there's three of them on top of that carriage.
Yep.
Yep.
So if you've got this one guy who managed to set up a trap for the Marcus family, assassinate the biggest, strongest of them, and take their ace of the hole super attack, what does it say about the other two that are on top of that carriage? And I think that's great foreshadowing of what you can expect for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and I also like that Grail is attached to machines keeping him alive, right? And so then I know that it doesn't ever get really answered, but the question is why? Why is he like that? Is the use of his power the reason that that he's like that? And each time
That
he
he's
uses
a
it,
stick skeleton.
yep, does that like use his life force? And so they do have this they do have the nuclear bomb, but every time they use it, they lose their brother a little bit
A little bit at a time.
And at some point,
And-
when is their last use where they lose their brother for it? And and that then brings up questions like,
What's the sacrifice?
Yep.
Yeah, or the feedback when she's putting the what seems oxygen mask on him, and he's clearly not reacting well to having his astral projection spirit sliced in half by D.
Yeah.
I thought about real quick about Benki, because Benki reminds me of the Marvel Comics character Cloak from Cloak and Dagger, where he opens up into like this being of like infinitesimal darkness. He just keeps going. It's like endless darkness inside. But when Dee sliced Grove, it made me wonder, what are the actual mystical properties of Dee's sword? And that's a question that I've been trying to do some research on, like one of those things where what other things, in that arsenal of his will be revealed. And if a sword can disrupt, a non-corporeal being, a pure spiritual energy, what else can it do other than just slice people?
Or is it the sword that's special, or the person who
Wields
is
it.
swinging it?
Yeah.
Or is it both?
Or is it both? Maybe, they need both of them to unlock whatever, incredible, powerful mysteries are, held within.
Yeah. And also, I love the fact that we keep getting teased about his medallion. Yeah.
Because it's hanging on his neck the whole time.
Yep. I
And
mean,
he
there
keeps
were a
cutting in
couple.
on it.
There were a couple scenes early on where that was the main. That was like the only thing moving in the whole shot, and it's the center point.
Over and over again, yeah.
Yeah, but we don't know what it does quite yet. Exactly. So.
And that's a good place to leave off.
Thank you for listening to Lefty Speaks, the official Vampire Hunter D podcast, hosted by Brandon Easton, Neal Fischer, and Scott McLean. This podcast is created by Unified Pictures and 9 Realms. Narration by Evallen-Muller. Recording and editing by 9 Realms. Produced by Scott McLean and Ian E. Muller. Based on the works created by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Happy hunting.